Hi everybody, it's great to be back. This is about the third time I've been to visit with you all, and I appreciate you all coming out and your concern about this race and how to make our state a better place to live. Let me begin by just introducing a couple of people. First of all, my wife Pamela is here. Many of you know Pamela. If you go to the Orange Coast Mayor's Prayer Breakfast, you know that Pamela has been putting that on now for more than a decade, and it's a real ministry that she has. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised next door here in Long Beach. I went to Millikan High School. I graduated from Cal State Long Beach with a degree in political science, a master's degree in public administration. And like many of my young colleagues here, I was actually also the president of the Young Republicans back in the day. I was active in the Nixon campaigns and the Reagan campaigns and for George Murphy when he was our United States Senator. I had the opportunity to meet Howard Jarvis. I was actually the program chairman for the Long Beach Lincoln Day dinner. He was our speaker. In 1980, I had a chance to sit with Howard at dinner. He was better after 2 martinis than any other speaker I've ever had. And he's done more for this state than anybody else. I worked with his partner, Paul Gann. Many of you remember Paul. Right after we passed Prop 13, we started what was called the Spirit of 13 initiative. And I was privileged as a young person to run the campaign to qualify that initiative for the ballot. We actually had the second highest number of signatures ever collected up to that time in California's history. Then Governor Brown put it on the ballot in 1979 and it passed. And what it did is it limited government spending and the growth of government spending to inflation. In fact, it was so effective, many of you may remember, because I remember the day I got mine, Governor Duke Majan actually sent checks back to taxpayers because the state collected too much money. And the Gann initiative that I was part of getting passed required us to rebate that to the taxpayers, and we actually did it. Now that initiative was subsequently changed in terms of its provisions. You still see cities adopt a Gann limitation every year. It's part of the Constitution, but the limit no longer effectively controls spending. If it had stayed the same, we would have avoided the $22 billion deficits that we had in recent years. After that, I worked for Supervisor Pete Shabara. Many of you may remember Pete. He was the father, after I left there, of modern term limits for the legislature. I worked with him in contracting out county services. That was when Mike Antonovich and Dean Dana got elected, so we now had a conservative majority for the first time on the LA board. I managed his 1982 re-election campaign, and in the fall I managed what was Proposition A. It was an anti-strike initiative in Los Angeles County for county employees, which passed overwhelmingly in LA County. After that, I went to Washington and joined the administration of President Ronald Reagan, one of the great honors of my life, to serve in the Transportation Department with Elizabeth Dole, and to serve with President Reagan for 5 years. I was the assistant to the Federal Transit Administrator, and then later went on to become the head of the private sector initiatives efforts for the Western states. I left the government in 1987 and I joined a company called Public Financial Management, which is a financial advisor to state and local governments. And we give advice to governments about how to manage effectively. We're often the firm that gets brought in when governments get in trouble, like Detroit or Miami was one, Philadelphia, other cities that have fiscal problems. I began a 24-year career there, which included heading the Western States practice and the National Transportation practice. I became an owner of the firm, and it grew from 64 people when I was hired to 450 people when I retired, the largest firm of its size, of its kind in the nation. We sold the company in 2009, and I retired in 2011, and I started the Concordia University Center for Public Policy, where I now teach in the Graduate Business School. It was my view that young Christian students in California ought to have the same opportunities to get jobs on Wall Street, to get jobs in government, that people coming out of the Ivy League schools that we used to hire at PFM used to get. And I'm very proud of the job we're able to do at Concordia. In 2006, I was appointed to the Newport Beach City Council. I've been re-elected to the City Council 3 times, and I served as mayor in 2010 and 2013. Perhaps the hallmark of my time on the City Council was taking over as mayor in 2010 because we were right in the middle of the recession. And my first act as mayor was to put forward a 15-point fiscal sustainability plan that laid out the policies that we were going to follow going into the recession. We reduced our workforce by more than 100 people. We did not touch our reserves for operating costs. Our reserves actually grew every year during the recession. They're now over $130 million. We generated a budget surplus every year during the recession, and this year it was $12.7 million of surplus. We had positive assessed valuation growth. Even though your house may have gone down in value, overall in the city, the property values went up because we encouraged investment and economic development in our city, and that kept our property taxes high. This year they grew 5.3%, the highest increase of any city in Orange County. At the same time, we had record investments in improving our public infrastructure. Costs were low. It was a good time to build, to add parks, to add library services, and we did that. And that's one of the things that helps keep our property values high is the investments that we make in infrastructure. $60 million this year in water, transportation, park, and sewer infrastructure. We initiated significant government reform. We had 2 comprehensive updates of the city charter. I introduced a charter amendment to prevent the abuse of eminent domain. We repealed unnecessary laws. We reformed our development department, which was known for being non-user friendly, in such a way that it received the Turning Red Tape into Red Carpet Award from the Orange County Business Council. Now, our city is in great shape, but as you know, our state is not. We have forced crime down to all-time record lows in Newport Beach, and in fact, this year, for the 4th year in a row, they're going to be at an all-time low. But the misguided state realignment is sending prisoners who should be in state prison back to the counties and back to the streets, and crime is moving up in the communities surrounding us, and they don't respect boundaries. They will come to Newport Beach. They'll come to your community, and we have to stop it. We have to stop this release. We're using our revenues to reinvest in our city, but the state took hundreds of millions of dollars in local tax dollars from our neighboring cities of Huntington Beach, Irvine, and Costa Mesa, local taxes that were creating jobs and infrastructure. And when these dollars were run back through the state distribution system for property tax, many of them were siphoned off to Oakland and San Francisco and Los Angeles, instead of creating economic development and jobs here in Orange County. We've achieved significant pension reforms in Newport Beach. We received an award from the Orange County Taxpayers Association because we have gone the furthest in having our employees pick up their pension costs, a portion of them. Our miscellaneous employees now pay nearly half of their pension costs. Our safety employees pay about a quarter. We need to move those numbers up. We introduced a 2nd and a 3rd tier, and we reduced our workforce. All of that's helped reduce our pensions costs. But the state continues to fail to provide us with the tools that we need to finish the job, like the ability to change benefits for current employees on a going forward basis, the ability to offer a defined contribution plan, the ability to limit cost of living escalation. All of those are things that we need in local government as tools to finish the job to reduce our pension costs. We have in my city a local economy that creates jobs and economic growth. But as Karina mentioned, the state's sending jobs off to Texas and every other state because of the regulations that they put in place that make it difficult to do business in California. We achieved a balance in our city between the legitimate interests of those needing drug rehabilitation assistance and the neighborhoods where they operate. But the state continues to put up roadblocks to responsible local regulations. And this is a constant theme. It doesn't matter what the issue is, whether it's fire pits, or whether it's toll roads, or whether it's group homes, or whether it's massage parlors. The state of California gets involved and puts regulations in the way of local government trying to do the job to make their cities a better place to live. This has got to stop. We are addressing the parks and recreation needs of our children. We have more than 63 parks in Newport Beach, and we're building $45 million more new parks as I speak. But the state delayed our plans and made these parks more costly than they needed to be through endless review and regulation. We've taken a hard line against shakedown lawsuits trying to milk the taxpayers. But the state continues to put its finger on the scales on behalf of the trial lawyers. And you'll see a ballot proposition this fall, supposedly to stop people who are drunk from operating on you, but it's really designed to take away the malpractice caps to make lawyers make more money for malpractice lawsuits. That's outrageous. That's what costs California jobs. It makes your insurance higher. It makes your medical costs higher. It makes this a bad place to do business. Now, we worked collaboratively on our city council with our neighboring cities, no matter what our personal political philosophies. But Sacramento continues to be marred in a partisan gridlock and ideological paralysis. So in order to address all of the issues that face our city, we must change Sacramento, which is why I'm running for the State Assembly to represent our beach communities in Sacramento. So what am I going to do? I want to leave you with just a few thoughts. The number one issue is we have got to protect Proposition 13. Proposition 13 is under attack. People are looking for ways to add a split roll, to take away your protections, to reassess your property faster. And if you come away with no other thought about where Keith Curry stands tonight, I am the guy who's going to Sacramento to protect Proposition 13. I was there with Howard Jarvis and Paul Gann when we passed it. I was there with Paul Gann when we passed the Spirit of 13 initiative, and I'm going to be there in my career in the Assembly to make sure that those guys up there don't screw it up and take away the protections that we voted for in 1978. I'm going to work to ensure that this realignment thing that we're doing in the state of California of turning hardened prisoners back into county jails as a means of saving the state money, who are now going back on the streets and doing crime, is stopped. The fact of the matter is that recidivists do 60% of the crimes, people who have been in prison before. I was at a conference recently with the probation officer from San Francisco, who's a big advocate for this, and she was very proud of the fact. She says, you know, only 21% of the crimes were committed by people who were subject to this program. And I thought about that for a while, and I realized, you know, that means that 1 out of 5 crimes was committed by somebody that should have been in prison. That's what that means. We've got to stop that. It's bad policy, and it's going to make our streets less safe. We need to cut the state sales tax and the state income tax. They are the highest in the nation. The highest in the nation. Now, the voters got suckered into voting for this with Proposition 30. Now, those taxes are going to roll off. So what we've got to do in Sacramento is we have got to build a rainy day reserve that takes the pressure off, because you know how they're going to do it. They're going to spend the money, and then they're going to say, oh my gosh, we're going to have to keep these taxes on longer. No, we have got to make sure that those taxes roll off and go back to their old levels, and frankly even lower, because it's the highest tax rates in the country, highest sales tax rate, highest income tax rate, that's driving jobs out of this state, that's making it difficult for us to educate our children. We've got to solve that problem. And then we've got to take care of our education needs. We don't do a good job of educating our children. We need to encourage more charter schools. We need to encourage better evaluation and the ability to deal with teachers. Let's start with the perverts, and then let's go to the incompetents, but let's have a law that allows us to deal with them in a way that's effective. Right now, the teachers union stops that and prevents us from doing it. The other thing we need to do is that we've got to make sure that Orange County gets its fair share. We are last in terms of taxes that are returned to Orange County. We have not been well served in the past by our delegation. We have not been well served in the past by getting rolled by the leadership in Sacramento. So we have to have people who can work collaboratively to see that Orange County gets a better portion of its sales tax and its property tax, particularly its property tax, coming back to our cities, back to our schools, to make sure that we receive the equity that we deserve here in Orange County. I've been in politics my entire life. From the time I was 13 years old, working for President Nixon, from my time in Washington working for President Reagan, from my time working for Pete Shabaram, working with Paul Gann, and now working on the City Council. And I look forward to going to Sacramento and having the opportunity to work for you to protect your property values, to protect Proposition 13, and to lower taxes in California. Thank you very much. Okay.
I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and while I'm asking these questions, if you still have a card or would like another one, we'll take some questions from the audience too. Keith, it's obvious that you want to hold taxes down. That you've been a fighter your whole life for taxes, and one of the things that confuses me is the fee or the rent for the boat docks in your city.
Right.
And if that was a requirement of the state, why? Maybe you can tell us why we couldn't fight that somehow, or make it a very minimal increase and meet the letter of the law.
Okay. The important thing to recognize here is that harbor rents are rents. The state of California, through the law, through the Beacon Bay Bill, says that the water on which those docks sit is public water. It belongs to you, every one of you. And we, the city, are your trustees responsible for administering that water. It involves, by the way, 800 people. It had 1,200 people. 400 of them we determined were not on public tidelands. They went from paying $100 a year to paying zero. So the question for you is as if you were a property manager. Some of you probably own properties or apartments, and you hired us to be your manager. How well did we do? Because in the 1990s, we decided that the fee was going to be $100, whether you had one little Duffy or whether you had 19 boats. And in fact, one guy has 19 boats. He has his own Navy. Now, that stayed that way for 20 years. So it's your property that we're administering. Did we do a good job for you? I don't think we did, because the law says that we're supposed to determine the fair market value. So what we did is we hired 2 appraisals. They went out, they appraised those docks, and they came back with a cost. We looked at that, we worked with the property owners, it's 800 people. We subsequently came back a year later, by the way, and changed it, made it even less costly. But the fact of it is that we're public trustees for the water that you own, and we're responsible for doing this under state law. Now, it's not a tax, it's a rent for public property. The Balboa Bay Club sits on public property and they pay rent. The ferry terminal sits on public property and they pay rent. That's what we do when you have public property that you have to administer on behalf of the people. And I would note this. In Huntington Beach, Huntington Harbor is administered directly by the State Lands Commission. And the reporter got a little snookered in the paper. The per foot fee is a little bit lower in Huntington Beach, but the formula that they use involves a much broader area, so the actual rents they pay, and I was talking to Frank Singer about this at breakfast today, are actually higher. So the fees in Newport are lower. The money stays in Newport to go to improvements in our harbor. In Huntington, their fees are higher, and it goes to the state, and they spend it anywhere they want to spend it. So it's not responsible to advocate your responsibilities there, because the state does have the ability to come in and take over and do that. And I would also add this. How many of you don't own a boat? Raise your hand. All right, if you live in Newport Beach, there's about 82,000 of you who don't own boats. We spent $6 million of your money to dredge the harbor last year, because dredging the harbor was an important thing to do. It hadn't been done on a comprehensive basis since President Roosevelt was president. So if we're going to spend money for people who don't own boats to dredge the harbor, isn't it fair that we ask people who do to pay a little bit too to offset those costs?
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask you how you feel about the Lincoln Club immigration plan. Do you agree with that plan? Why or why not? And kind of one that came from the audience here, with the growing Latino population, how do you relate and deal with that fact?
Well, I've been a 20-year member of the Lincoln Club, and I support the policy. Here's the thing about that. You know, I was watching a lecture this week. Do you know that the Pilgrims were under a charter to settle in the Virginia Company? The Virginia Company at that time, their territory extended all the way up to Manhattan. They actually landed in the wrong spot. They were chartered and paid for by a guy, sponsored, to go to the Virginia Company. They ended up in Massachusetts. They actually were technically illegal because they were not authorized to be in Massachusetts. They were supposed to be in what's now New York. The fact of the matter is that we have 12 million people in America, and it is not practical nor moral to march them all to the border at the point of a bayonet. We need to do a couple of things. We need to secure our borders better than we're doing them now, because they simply don't work. We also need to provide a way, and President Reagan did this. This is President Reagan's idea that people now call amnesty, but back then it was for Karina and for millions of others, it was a gateway to citizenship. And that is, we need to provide a means for people who are here illegally to pay a fine, to settle their, and it is a misdemeanor, by the way, it's a fine-paying kind of thing, it's not a felony, to settle their costs, pay their fee, and provide a process by which they can either work here. Most of them simply don't want to be citizens, they just want to work here, and frankly our economy needs them to work here. And those that want to stay can get into a pathway that will ultimately either lead to citizenship or lead them to an opportunity to work legally, which is what most of them really want, and do that fairly.
Here's one from the audience.
I hope you asked my opponents that too, the other guys.
How will you be more effective in the legislature than your previous Republicans from Orange County in the years past?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I believe in evidence-based decision-making, so we're going to work on, finding the right facts and working across the aisle. Because there's so many Democrats now, there actually are a few that are actual moderates. There's never enough of them to be a majority, by the way, but there are a few of them up there that you can work with. And you can't do anything for our district unless you can count to 41, which means you've got to be able to find Democrats that you can work with, or you can't get anything passed. That's simply the way the math works. So I have always been able, in my entire career in public finance, my entire career on the city council, to work with people no matter what their political affiliation is, to find common ground, to move forward on a positive agenda. It's a positive agenda for Democrats and Republicans to improve our schools. It's a positive agenda for Democrats and Republicans to enhance Crystal Cove, to enhance our beaches, to have clean water. I think we can find consensus and common ground to do that.
Thank you. One here about the voter ID initiative, in-state tuition.
What is it?
What is your position?
What are they? Okay. I think voters ought to have a valid identification, absolutely. And I think if you live in California, the tuition thing, you can go to Arizona, by the way, and pay because there's a reciprocal agreement and get a tuition break there because the western states have an agreement. So we should charge people the appropriate and fair tuition based on where they live. And we should have clear IDs for people when they vote to make sure that they are who they say they are. Voter fraud in this country, by the way, because I got a chance to travel around the country a little bit and get a national perspective. It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem in California, and it's an even bigger problem in states like Illinois and in New York and in other states. And we've got to stop that.
Keith, one last question. The Tea Party and many conservative groups champion limited government. Mm-hmm. What does limited government mean to you?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, limited government means we don't give authority to agencies like the Coastal Commission to come into local cities and tell us what we need to do on our beaches, or tell us that we've got to go to the Coastal Commission, like some of this legislation is. It's trying to get to fire pits. You think it's just going to protect fire pits. What it's really doing is it's giving the Coastal Commission power to decide how long the beach can be open, what can be burned, who can go there, and what kind of stuff you can put in the pits. That's simply, that is an expansion of big government right there. And I don't think you can say that you're a small government conservative and support giving the Coastal Commission, the most out of control, the most arrogant, the most offensive public agency in the state, additional power. I oppose that. Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for being here. I think Karina did a good job on clarifying that. People use that word amnesty very sloppily, and we need to be careful about it. That's one of the reasons why we're a 29% Republican Party. I support a work permit for people who want to come here and work, and where they pay a fee if they've crossed the border illegally. Let me just talk a little bit about the fire pits. So let me be clear about where I stand on fire pits. I think each individual city ought to have the right to decide for themselves what they want to do. And if Huntington Beach wants to have all the fire rings, I'm all for that. In fact, I've got a piece tomorrow, it's up on the blog now on the Huntington Beach Independent, that says exactly that. Each city should decide for itself. We don't need bureaucrats, whether it's the Coastal Commission or the AQMD or political opportunists from out of town, telling us what we ought to do in our city. Now, if Travis's bill said the AQMD and the Coastal Commission, get out of the way, you are prohibited from involving cities, let cities do what they want to do in their own city, I would be all for that bill. But let's read what the bill actually says. This bill would require a local, that's a city, or regional authority located in the AQMD district to obtain a coastal development permit in order to regulate, prohibit, or restrict the use of fire rings. Well, does that mean that our 10 p.m. curfew needs to go get a coastal permit? Does that mean that if we want to ban people who want to burn pallets or furniture, that needs to go get a permit? Those are additional regulations being put on by the California Coastal Commission through this bill. Now, you can be all for fire rings. I like fire rings. I go to them too. But the fact of it is, you can't be a constitutionalist. You can't be a true conservative and say you want to take power away from elected local officials and give it to the California Coastal Commission, for crying out loud. That runs very counter to conservative principles, which is why I can't support the bill the way it's written. I would support it if it says AQMD and Coastal Commission, You get out of the way. You let local city councils make those decisions. Thank you all for coming tonight.